My name is Mara Collins, and I paid for my own birthday dinner so the peace would feel real. A long table at a Portland bistro glowed with very low candles and polite laughter. My son Aiden was home with a sitter. And I told myself tonight would be uncomplicated. I was wrong again. Across the table, my mother, Veronica Collins, leaned toward my father, Robert, and whispered like a command. She told him to have my brother, Derek, drive to my apartment and change the locks. She said it as if I weren't sitting 3 chairs away. Robert nodded without meeting my eyes. Derek grabbed his keys and left with the casual confidence of someone who has never been told no. I cut another slice of cake and kept my face still. Sugar and silence tasted familiar. The room hummed like nothing sharp had happened. 60 minutes later, Derek returned as pale as the tablecloth. He hovered beside his chair, shoulders tight, and said there was yellow police tape across my door. Every fork stopped midair. The air felt suddenly narrow. Robert asked what kind of joke it was, and Veronica demanded details she could shape. Derek shook his head and stared at the table. Somewhere between his denial and her control, a switch flipped in me. I decided I was done asking anyone for permission. My phone buzzed. A message from Detective Evan Pike asked me to contact him about my apartment. The scrape of my chair was its own announcement. The candles wobbled like witnesses. I stepped into the night. The cold felt factual. If there was tape on my door, it wasn't random. It read like a message for my family. Not me. If a message had been delivered, it belonged to my mother first. Truly. 2 patrol cars still idled outside my apartment complex. When I arrived, red and blue lights washed the brick walls like bruises that refused to fade. Detective Evan Pike met me at the entrance. His tone careful but direct. He asked if I was Mara Collins, the tenant on record, and told me there had been a break-in. The door to my unit was splintered. One lock twisted clean off. Inside, everything looked untouched, no drawers pulled. No valuables missing. Just order that felt rehearsed. But every framed photo of me and my son, Aiden, had been turned face down. On the coffee table lay a single envelope printed in stark black letters. Evan gestured toward it as I stepped closer. The message read, "Tell your mother the truth always finds its way home." The words felt deliberate, impersonal, like they'd been written by someone who knew exactly where they'd land. I asked who had been inside, but Evan's radio cracked before he could answer. A voice on the other end said they'd matched prints from my apartment. The name that came back was Dylan Kincaid, a maintenance worker for the building. Evan asked if anyone else had a key. I told him my brother, Derek, had one because my mother, Veronica, told him to use it tonight. Evan's expression tightened. The logic didn't add up, and we both knew it. A hired hand had entered my home but taken nothing, leaving a message that wasn't mine to read. Standing there among flipped photos and broken locks, I understood what Derek saw that turned him pale. Someone wasn't breaking in to steal. They were breaking in to deliver. The next morning, Detective Evan Pike called with confirmation. The man who'd broken into my apartment, Dylan Kincaid, had received a payment from an account under my mother's name. The transfer was labeled as maintenance services, dated just 3 days before my birthday. I listened in silence, letting the weight of it settle before I asked him to email the documentation. When the message arrived, I printed every page. The transaction, the timestamp, even the routing path, it all pointed to Veronica Collins. I didn't call her. I didn't even text. Instead, I drove to my office, logged into a private cloud, and uploaded digital copies of every document that could protect me later. There was one box that now felt too important to ignore, the one I'd found weeks ago in my attic, labeled Dad's Business Papers. Inside were property deeds signed by both my parents, but never filed with the IRS. I'd left it untouched until now, unsure what I was really holding. Suddenly, it looked like the very thing my mother had been desperate to retrieve. I photographed each page, saved them twice, then hid the originals in a storage locker registered under my maiden name. Before I left, I placed a decoy folder in the attic, a neat stack of blank forms, watermarked to look official. If Veronica tried again, she'd take the bait and leave a trail. By the afternoon, Evan called to say the investigation would continue quietly for now. He advised caution, but I already understood the game. If my mother wanted secrets buried, I'd make sure every shovel she used was traceable. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't running defense anymore. I was playing offense. At 7 sharp, my mother arrived at my apartment, dressed as if she were meeting a client, not the daughter she had paid someone to rob. I had already placed my phone on the kitchen counter, voice recorder running in plain sight. Veronica noticed it but didn't comment. Control was her favorite illusion. She sat down on the couch, crossing her legs with the same precision she used to sign lies into existence. She started with disappointment, not apology. She said I should never have called the police, that I was blowing something small into something dangerous. I told her she should never have sent a criminal into my home. Her eyes narrowed, but her tone softened the way it always did before she said something cruel. Veronica claimed she was only protecting the family, that my father's business was complicated. She said the documents I found in the attic didn't belong to me, that Thomas, or rather Dylan, was supposed to retrieve them quietly. I asked why she couldn't have simply told me the truth. Her answer was the kind of silence that explains everything. When she finally spoke, her mask cracked just enough to show fear. She said if those papers surfaced, my father, Robert, could lose everything, maybe even face prison. I told her she should have thought about that before using my social security number to hide undeclared assets. She froze, realizing how much I already knew. I let the quiet stretch before saying I'd stopped being her pawn. She stood abruptly, warning that I'd regret turning on my own family. I looked her straight in the eye and said regret was her legacy, not mine. For a long moment, we just stared. Two women who finally understood each other too well. Then she left without saying goodbye. 2 days later, I spent the morning at my office using the same tools I was paid to monitor for compliance breaches. Public records, open access filings, archived building contracts, everything left a digital fingerprint if you knew where to look. I searched for the construction company tied to my father, Robert Collins, and the ownership chain of the undeclared properties. The metadata alone told me there was more rot buried under his name than I had imagined. Through a backdoor lookup, I found a corporate email thread archived in a public submission folder. It included a signed digital authorization with Derek's name on it. The file timestamp showed he had approved a wire transfer to an offshore consultant the same week Dylan was paid for maintenance. My brother hadn't just followed orders, he had executed part of the scheme. I kept digging, tracking Dylan Kincaid's work orders through the building's maintenance portal. Each request he logged was for units owned by shell companies connected to my parents' network. I contacted his supervisor, Howard Kincaid, under my professional title, requesting verification for an audit inquiry. Within minutes, he confirmed Dylan's access history. Every unlocked door followed a private instruction. That's when I realized what Veronica had really paid for. The retrieval wasn't to take something out, it was to swap the real documents with fakes. She'd wanted to destroy the only original copies that could tie the assets back to Robert. But the detail that froze me came next. The watermark on the letter left inside my apartment, the one that read, "Tell your mother the truth," matched the office printer model registered to Robert's company. The message wasn't from Dylan at all. It came from my father. He had crafted the warning to frame Veronica if things went wrong, turning their marriage into a built-in alibi. In this family, even the threats came pre-signed. By the following week, I had everything I needed to make my first move. I met with Detective Evan Pike and handed him a compiled report linking the false deeds, the offshore transfers, and the maintenance payment trail. He reviewed it quietly, then told me the evidence was enough to trigger a financial audit. I didn't smile, but for the first time, I exhaled without guilt. Within 48 hours, the bank initiated a temporary freeze on the accounts connected to Veronica and Robert Collins. The notification hit them before breakfast. And by noon, their accountant had called every contact in panic. I didn't answer any of their messages. My parents had built their empire on borrowed names and forged signatures. Now the paper walls were finally folding. At the same time, I filed an identity theft affidavit with the IRS, attaching proof that my Social Security number had been used for asset registration. It meant I could no longer be held liable for unpaid taxes or property disclosures tied to their fraud. The same system they once manipulated now shielded me. My mother always said paperwork was power. She just never imagined I'd learn to use it better. By Thursday, Veronica called from a blocked number, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. She said if I didn't withdraw my complaint, she'd petition for custody of Aiden, claiming I was emotionally unstable. I let her words hang in the air before ending the call. Every threat she made only confirmed she was losing control. I wasn't the frightened daughter, she remembered. I was the quiet consequence she created. Detective Evan Pike called the next afternoon with an update that shifted everything. Dylan Kincaid had confessed during questioning. He admitted that Veronica Collins paid him to enter my apartment, but insisted the printed note was already waiting at Robert's office when he picked up the duplicate keys. Evan's voice was even, but I could hear the disbelief under it. My parents weren't just corrupt, they were competing in deception. I decided it was time to expose the cracks between them. I sent Derek a calm, baiting email about the USB copy Mom asked for. Knowing he'd panic, he arrived at my apartment that evening, sweat beading at his collar, demanding to see the files. What he didn't realize was that my doorbell camera was recording every word of his confession about signing documents he didn't read. Later that night, I received an anonymous email from a woman named Claire Mercer, a former bookkeeper at my father's company. She had seen the local news about the audit and wanted to clear her conscience. Attached was a scanned ledger showing $250,000 transferred into an offshore trust on the same date Robert printed the threatening letter. Claire wrote that Robert told her it was a legal contingency fund. When I compared the ledger with the printer logs Evan had obtained, the timestamps matched to the minute. The message left in my apartment wasn't a warning, it was insurance. Robert had created a narrative where Veronica looked guilty. Dylan looked reckless, and he looked like a victim cleaning up after them. The whole family had become collateral in his cover story. I saved every file twice, labeling the folder Truth. Final. For the first time, the puzzle made sense. The person who taught me how to hide evidence had also taught me how to expose it. I met Detective Evan Pike early Monday morning at the Financial Crimes Division. The evidence folder I handed him was thicker than before emails, transfer log, and the confession recording from Derek. Evan reviewed each document carefully, his expression shifting from skepticism to quiet certainty. He said once this package went through, the district attorney would have no choice but to open a full-scale investigation. By Wednesday, subpoenas were issued. Robert Collins was forced to step down from his construction firm, pending charges of identity fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction. Veronica's bank accounts were frozen. Her consulting business placed under review for money laundering. The same signatures she once used to shield her husband now tied her directly to every illegal transfer. Derek's cooperation earned him leniency, but not absolution. He signed a plea agreement admitting to forging my authorization on property deeds. Claiming he was following parental orders, his license was revoked, and his job at the dealership dissolved overnight. Dylan Kincaid received a reduced sentence for his role after confirming Veronica's involvement in the break-in, while his supervisor, Howard, faced civil penalties for falsified access logs. When the official press release went public, the statement listed me as a victim of identity abuse and primary witness. My parents' empire, the one built on control and shame, crumbled under its own paperwork. Friends they had for decades stopped returning calls. Every headline carried the same quiet verdict: they had done this to themselves. That night, I sat at my desk reading the final legal summary. Evan emailed me. The investigation was now formally concluded. I wasn't angry anymore. I was emptied in the cleanest way possible. My mother once said our family's legacy was built on loyalty. She never imagined I'd rewrite what loyalty meant. The investigation became public a month later, but I didn't watch the news coverage. I didn't need to see my parents' faces on the screen to know what justice looked like. Their empire was gone. Their silence total. For the first time, peace didn't feel borrowed, it felt earned. Detective Evan Pike called to confirm that all charges against me had been cleared. My name was no longer attached to any fraudulent accounts, and the IRS had updated my record. He told me I'd done the right thing, though the word right felt strange after everything it cost. When we hung up, I realized I didn't feel like a victim or a hero. I just felt free. That evening, I hosted a small dinner for the friends who had stayed when things fell apart. We toasted to new beginnings, to quiet homes, to peace that didn't depend on anyone's permission. My son Aiden sat at the table with his favorite pancakes, grinning when syrup dripped down his chin. "We're okay now, Mom," he said. And he was right. The next morning, I mailed one last envelope to the district attorney, an overlooked document linking my father's final offshore fund. No note, no signature, just closure. When I sealed it, I whispered the same words I'd once feared hearing from my mother: "This ends here." Then I turned to Aiden, who was waiting by the counter with his backpack. "Ready for school?" I asked. He nodded, smiling. Outside, the city shimmered with new light, the kind that only comes after a storm. I locked the door behind us, not to keep the past out, but to keep the future in. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story spoke to you, please subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And if you carry a story of your own, I invite you to share it in the comments. Your voice matters here, always.